Rich, lonely cowboy seeks housekeeper, finds Cowgirl sleeping in his barn beside her horse. Before we ride into this story, take a moment to drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from, what town or city you're calling home tonight. And when you reach the end of this story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now lean back, get comfortable, and enjoy the story. She knocked with her left hand because her right was holding up a horse too tired to stand. Mud dripped from her coat. Lightning cracked behind her like some cruel drum. And on the porch of a ranch that hadn't seen company in years, a man opened the door with one arm in a sling and didn't say a word. He just looked at her, at the trembling horse beside her, and then he stepped aside. That's how Frank Buchanan let a stranger into his home, and how a woman with nowhere to go found the one place that still believed in healing. The rancher, the rider, and the storm. The storm rolled in from the Bitterroot like a memory no one asked for, the kind that makes old barns groan in their bones. And men, too. Frank Buchanan sat in silence near the hearth, one arm hanging useless, a faded cavalry coat draped around his shoulders like armor, too tired for battle. Outside, thunder cracked like the sound of a war he still heard some nights. He hadn't spoken to his son in 4 years, hadn't heard a child's voice in 6, hadn't slept a full night since his wife died quietly in the upstairs bedroom. Her last words, a whisper he still couldn't bear to say out loud. Frank had land, money, a name folks respected, but the inside of his house was quieter than a coffin. And some days, he swore it smelled the same too. Down the valley trail, soaking wet and leading a limping stallion, came a woman with more grit than she had gear. Stella Riley, 33, face sharp from hunger, and eyes hard from not looking back. She wasn't looking for kindness. She was looking for shelter. Behind her walked Valor, a once great racing horse now walking like a ghost. His leg was swollen, his body shivering, but still, he followed her because she was the only one who hadn't given up on him. She knocked once, then twice. No answer. Then the door opened, not wide, not warm, just enough to let the light spill out like it wasn't sure it should. Frank stood there, shoulder crooked, face unreadable. "You the owner?" she asked. He didn't answer, just looked at the horse, then her, and stepped aside. She led Valor into the barn like it was hallowed ground. The wood smelled of hay, old sweat, and time. She bedded the horse herself, hands moving with practiced tenderness. When she returned to the porch, soaking and shivering, she found a folded blanket and a tin cup of hot water waiting. No words, just space. The next morning, she helped him reset his shoulder. "You're lucky," she said, as the bone clicked back into place. He grunted. "Doesn't feel that way. You ever try lifting a horse leg in the rain with one arm?" That was the first time he smiled in months. By day 3, she was still there. Not because she asked, but because she worked, chopping wood with borrowed gloves, clearing brush, feeding his dog before herself. No complaints, no questions. She earned her keep like someone who didn't want charity, just a reason to stay standing. Frank didn't ask her story, and she didn't offer it. But every time she checked on Valor, every time she made sure the porch was swept, the unspoken answer sat between them. She had nowhere else to go. Late one evening, Frank found her, sitting by the corral, watching the fog rise. She had a locket in her hand open, empty. Would she dare to stay, he thought, and more frightening still, would he let her? Part 1. The mud, the locket, and the shoulder. He didn't ask her name that first morning, didn't ask where she came from, just handed her a tin mug of coffee, nodded toward the paddock, and went back to brushing his old gelding with one arm. His shoulder was wrapped tight cloth and pride holding it in place. Stella saw right through both. "You need it reset," she said. Frank didn't argue. He just set the brush down, grunted once, and sat on a bale of hay. The pop echoed through the barn like a rifle shot. He didn't flinch. Neither did she. When it was done, she wrapped it with clean cloth, her own bandana, torn into strips, and didn't ask anything more. By the third day, she'd repaired 2 fence rails, trimmed the bay mare's hooves, and shoveled muck with more precision than anyone had seen on that ranch in years. She didn't wait to be told, didn't glance back for thanks. She just worked. At night, she bedded down beside her horse, Valor, who still wouldn't put weight on his front leg. She whispered to him the way some folks whisper prayers. Not loud, but like she meant every word. "You carried me through things I don't talk about," she told him. "I'll carry you now." Frank noticed how she moved, like someone who'd been trained, then broken, then taught herself how to move again. There was grace in it, but not the kind that wins ribbons. The kind that comes from falling and rising even when no one's watching. She didn't ask for charity. She didn't even ask to stay. But one morning, Frank found a locket in the hay near her bedroll. Silver, tarnished. He opened it. Empty. No picture. No hair. No inscription. Just hollow. He left it beside her without a word. Later that day, she picked it up, turned it slowly in her fingers. "It used to hold someone's face," she said softly. Frank didn't look up from his work. "Still does," he replied, "just not where you can see it." That was the first time she looked at him, not as a rancher, not as a stranger, but as a man who knew how to hurt quietly. That night, she found the door to the house unlocked. A blanket folded at the foot of the bed. No words, just space. And sometimes, that's more sacred than kindness. He told her about his shoulder one night, when the fire was low and the wind scratched at the windows. "Horse through me," he said, then paused. "But it was what came after that did the damage." She nodded, didn't press. Pain doesn't always start with the fall. Then Michael came, Frank's son, hair slicked back, boots too clean for real ranch soil, voice too loud for a quiet house. "So you're the help?" he said, eyeing Stella, or the charity. She kept brushing Valor, didn't look up. Michael smirked. Always knew Pa had a soft spot for strays. Pity he didn't show the same for his own blood. Frank's hand tightened on the porch rail, but he said nothing. That night, Stella sat by the corral, watching the fog lift off Riley Creek. She took out the locket again. Frank joined her, slow and stiff. "You ever wonder," she said, "if some people don't get saved? They just get used to the ache." He didn't answer, but when he left, he handed her a folded piece of paper, a deed, half filled, old, frayed, his wife's name still visible at the top. The land marked Riley Creek Valley. "Thought about signing it once," he muttered, "to keep the miners out. Never did." She looked down at it, then up at him. "Why not?" He didn't answer. But that night, she found a saddle, cleaned, polished, waiting by the barn door. She didn't know it then, but that saddle meant something. Meant she wasn't just passing through anymore. Not to him, but the wind changed by morning. And when she stepped outside, 3 horses waited at the gate. Michael in front, 2 men behind him in long coats marked Western Mining. And one look told her they know what's buried under Riley Creek. Stella, standing tall beside Valor, the locket in one hand, the deed in the other. Behind her, Frank, shoulder wrapped, jaw set, and Michael, riding closer, with the wrong kind of smile. Part 2. The sun, the soil, and the silence. The morning they came, the ground didn't feel right. Not muddy, not soft. Watchful, like the land already knew. It was about to be claimed by men who'd never once listened to it. Michael dismounted with the arrogance of someone holding contracts in his pocket. and no one left to convince. Behind him, two men in long wool coats, city-dressed, already squinting at the ridgeline like they saw numbers where others saw trees. Stella stood her ground, didn't speak, just rested one hand on Valor's bridle, like he might need her calm more than she needed his strength. Frank came out slow, favoring his shoulder. He didn't say welcome, didn't say leave, just waited. That was his way. Michael gestured toward the creek bed. They'll drill near the ridge, test for lithium first. The company's offering triple market value. It's a fortune. Don't let pride bury you. Frank looked at the land, then at Stella, then back at his son. That ridge, he said quietly, is where your mother asked to be scattered. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It roared. They ate at separate tables that night. Frank sat alone at the big one, staring at the unlit oil lamp across from him. Michael stayed in the guest room, polishing his boots like it mattered. Stella ate in the barn with Valor. Her hands shook as she tied his bandage, fingers that had dressed war wounds. But never this kind, because this wasn't about money. It was about erasure, about men naming a place without knowing what it meant. Later, by firelight, Stella asked, "Why didn't you say more to him?" Frank didn't look up. Sometimes a man has to choose between shouting and staying. She didn't fully understand. Not yet. The next day, the surveyors came. They marked trees with ribbons, staked corners in the pasture, drove iron pins into soil where deer once bedded down. Stella followed from a distance, arms folded. One of the younger men tipped his hat. "You got nice dirt here." "Ma'am." She didn't answer, didn't need to. That night, in the dining room, she found a plate set for Michael, but not for her. Frank saw her standing there, one hand still on the chair. He cleared his throat. "Yours is warming by the fire. I wasn't sure if—" "I don't need permission," she said. Her voice didn't rise, but her eyes burned. Frank weathered, battle-worn. Frank looked away. She didn't sleep in the house that night, didn't sleep in the barn either. She sat by the creek, let the wind tangle her hair, let the cold reach through her coat. She stayed, because sometimes you sit where the threat is coming from, just to remind yourself you still belong. Morning came hard. The stakes had moved. Closer now, one was hammered straight into the old cedar, where Frank's wife once hung her wind chimes. Stella pulled it out, tossed it down the hill without a word. Michael rode up within the hour. "You can't interfere, miss. That's legal ground now." "Then sue me," she said. Michael smirked. "I'd rather buy you out. How much is your loyalty worth?" She didn't answer. Frank stood on the porch, listening. When Michael rode off, Frank stayed quiet. So Stella spoke. "You know why they get bolder?" She asked. "Because we get quieter." Frank looked down at his boots, then at the wind chime. Now still. That evening, a letter arrived. Western Mining's final offer. Gold-stamped envelope, typed names in bold. Frank Buchanan and Associated Party. Stella Riley. Frank didn't open it, just laid it on the table between them. Neither of them touched it, but they both sat there a long time, watching it, like it might rise up and decide for them. That week, Valor limped worse. The stress soaked into him, same as it soaked into Stella. She began waking at night with fists clenched, dreams of fire, of gates ripped open, of losing everything. Again, she started packing quietly, her saddlebag by the door, her stirrup straps restitched. A goodbye without a goodbye. But Frank saw, he always saw, and one morning, he left something at her bunk. A folded cloth. Inside it, one word, written in his hand, "Stay." No signature, no plea, just that one word. It meant more than any contract. Then came the breaking point. The youngest surveyor, barely more than a boy, wandered too close to Valor's stall, startled the horse. Valor kicked, hard, The boy screamed. Bones snapped. Stella ran. Frank followed. Blood. Mud. Yelling. Michael shouting threats. The others cursing. The boy sobbing. By nightfall, it was official. Michael threatened charges unless Frank signed. Frank stood still, then handed the envelope back. I'd rather lose my name than sell her grave. Michael didn't return after that, and the surveyors pulled out the next week, quietly, but not without scars. The house went still again, too still. Stella sat by the window, holding her locket. Frank sat by the fire, holding nothing. Neither of them spoke, because now there was no fight left. Only choice. Part 3. The deed, the fire, and the footsteps. Frank didn't sleep the night after Michael left. He sat in the big leather chair by the hearth, the fire down to embers. The conservation deed unfolded across his lap, like a letter from someone long gone. Stella's saddlebag still sat by the door. She hadn't unpacked it since the accident. Hadn't spoken much either. Sometimes silence is war. Sometimes it's surrender. That night, it was something in between. By morning, frost had crept down the windows, and the barn roof shimmered under a pale sky. Frank stepped out slow, shoulders stiff, coat too thin for the wind, but the deed still in hand. He found her at the creek again, same rock she always sat on. Her breath left small clouds in the cold. Valor stood nearby, his leg finally bearing full weight for the first time in weeks. He stood all night, she said, without turning. Frank nodded. So did I. She looked at him then, not with anger, not with fear, just the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying too many years in too few memories. I'll be gone tomorrow, she said. I'll take Valor. You won't hear from me again, but I'll always be grateful. Frank didn't blink. He just reached into his coat and held out the deed, signed. Every line inked in his stiff, crooked hand, witnessed, stamped. He held it like a man offering a piece of his soul, not knowing if it would be accepted or left to burn. I didn't do it for Michael, he said. I didn't do it for you. A pause. I did it for her. And for me, and maybe for a woman who made this ranch feel alive again. Stella stared at the paper. Didn't take it, didn't cry, but something in her chest shifted. It wasn't a promise. It was a question. That evening, Frank cleaned the east barn, the one no one was ever allowed in. He cleared the dust, opened the shutters, aired out. Years of silence. Inside were crates of his wife's old books, a hand-sewn quilt, and a wooden sign that once hung on their gate. No gold worth more than green. That night, he hung it back, hammered it in with a shaking hand. Stella watched from the window, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a visitor. 2 days passed, then 3. Stella didn't leave, but she didn't quite stay. Either she kept working, fixed the chicken coop, oiled the saddles, rewrapped Valor's leg, even though he no longer limped. Frank never asked why, and that was the difference, because she was waiting for something not to be said. Then came the fire. It started on the west ridge. Lightning, most likely. Dry brush. High wind. By the time they saw the smoke, it was already miles wide. Neighbors came riding, with buckets, with axes, with whatever they had. Frank mounted up. Shoulder be damned. Stella didn't wait for permission. She rode straight into the smoke. They fought side by side, Frank yelling orders, Stella breaking brush with her bare hands. Flames lit her face like war paint. She moved like someone with something to lose. Then the wind shifted. Stella was cut off, cornered in a dry gully as the fire swept low. Frank saw it. He spurred his horse, rode straight through the flame. He reached her, wrapped her in his coat, covered her with his body as the fire passed. They lay still for what felt like forever. Then, she whispered, I was ready to burn, he answered. So was I, but they didn't. By dawn, the fire was out. Ash covered everything, but the ranch still stood. The fences, the barn, the home, still there. Like them. Frank didn't say much that day. Neither did Stella. But that night, when he walked in, he saw her saddlebag, gone from the door, unpacked, put away, hung neat beside the old cavalry bags. And on the table, a bowl set for two. He sat, and for the first time since she arrived, he asked, gently, "How was your day?" She smiled, just barely, better than yesterday. That night, she lit a lamp in the east barn, opened the doors wide, and for the first time in years, Frank walked in without flinching. Part 4. The things that grew. After ash, after the fire. The air smelled of smoke and pine sap for weeks, but no one spoke of what almost burned. They just went back to mending. Mending fences, mending barn doors, mending something older than both. Themselves. Stella unpacked slow. One blanket, one worn book, a halter, with Valor's name stitched in red thread. Each item found its place, not just in the barn, but in the house, like a root easing back into soil. It had once been torn from. She never said she was staying. Frank never asked, but her boots stayed by the door, and his coffee cup was never poured for one again. Mornings changed. She started baking biscuits without being told. Frank fed the chickens, humming, just barely, but enough to be noticed. They didn't talk much, but the silence had changed. It wasn't full of unsaid things anymore. It was full of understanding. One morning, Stella placed something on the porch rail, a small tin can filled with dirt. Inside, a seedling just beginning to push through. "Wildflower," she said. When Frank noticed, "Don't know what kind, but it'll show us in time." He stared at it longer than she expected, then nodded. Once, later that week, Frank brought her down to Riley Creek, where the surveyor stakes once scarred the land. The brush had grown back, new grass, birdsong, breath. He handed her a wooden box. She opened it. Inside, his late wife's wind chime, restored, strings replaced, copper lightly polished. She used to say, "The wind spoke kinder when this was up." Stella hung it from the cedar herself, and the first breeze that passed through made a sound so soft it silenced them both. Valor began to run again. Not far, not fast, but enough. Stella didn't cry. The first time, he galloped the fence line again. She just gripped the gate rail and whispered, "That's all I needed." Frank heard, didn't speak. But that night, he cleared the second stall for Valor, right beside his wife's old mare's stall. He left a new nameplate, Valor Home. Days stretched into rhythm. She planted a garden patch, parsley, onions, and one stubborn bean vine. Frank fixed the porch swing, which hadn't held weight in years. They shared lunch on the tailgate some afternoons. Not a date, not a ritual, just there. Like the land had remembered how to breathe. One Sunday, the rain came, soft, steady. They didn't go outside. Instead, Stella sat by the fire, stitching a saddle strap. Frank nearby, cleaning his rifle with the quiet reverence of ritual. Then he spoke, not loud, not fast. "She asked me once, before she died, 'Will you ever let someone else live here? Or just ghosts?'" Stella looked up. He didn't. "I didn't have an answer then, but I do now." A pause. She set the strap down. "You sure it's not just the quiet talking?" He smiled, almost. "No, it's you." She didn't reply, just stood, walked to the hook by the door, and hung her saddle for good. That night, Valor rested beneath the open sky. The wind chime whispered, like a woman, finally at peace. And in the kitchen, 2 plates were washed, 2 chairs pulled in, 2 boots left by the door. No rings, no ceremony, no grand confession. But everything had changed. Part 5. What remains after we stay? The first snow came early that year. It blanketed the hills in white hush, softening every scar the land had worn through summer. Fences, burned lines, survey stakes, gone beneath the snow, like they were never there. Frank stood on the porch that morning, steaming coffee in one hand, his old cavalry coat in the other, behind him. The smell of cinnamon. Stella's doing. He didn't speak as she joined him. She didn't need to. She was wearing his wife's shawl, not like a ghost, like a continuation. Down at the barn, Valor pawed at the snow, playful, strong, sure again. Stella leaned against the fence, smiling like someone who'd finally given her heart a place to live. Not loudly, but securely. A letter had come the day before. Western Mining's final retreat. No more offers, no lawsuits, just a polite resignation. Michael hadn't written, but Frank had a single letter, never sent, tucked inside his wife's old Bible. It read, "You weren't wrong to dream bigger. Son, I was just too scared to lose what I love to tell you that." They never discussed marriage. Some people don't need to. Some people simply begin sharing seasons. Spring brought rows of carrots and onions in Stella's garden patch. Summer brought picnics by Riley Creek, quiet ones, full of glances and shared bread. Autumn brought new fence posts, planted shoulder to shoulder. And now, winter brought memory. One evening, Stella came in, carrying a small, carved frame. Inside, an old photograph. Frank hadn't seen it in years. His wife, seated on a horse, laughing mid-blink, and beside her, a younger version of himself, hand outstretched, like he didn't know how to hold her, but wanted to. "I found it behind the fireplace," Stella said. Frank held it like something alive. Then he placed it on the mantel, not beside her locket. Between her locket and a new photo, Stella with Valor. That winter was the first he didn't dread. The house filled up without filling the silence. There were quilts, sourdough starters, and the small things. Her handwriting on feed notes, his boots cleaned and set beside hers. A horseshoe nailed above the window, not for luck, but to mark a place claimed by love. Then came the boy, not theirs, but lost. A knock at dusk, thin frame, raw hands, eyes that had seen too much for his age. He said nothing, just pointed toward Valor and mouthed one word. Horse? Stella didn't ask. She just stepped aside. Frank brought the boy stew. That night, they laid out a bedroll near the fire. The boy stayed one day, then two. He helped in the barn, fixed hinges, brushed Valor. Stella watched him carefully. Frank watched her. "What's his name?" she asked. Frank shook his head. Didn't ask. On the third day, the boy left without a word, but he left something behind. A drawing, charcoal on a scrap of canvas. Crude, but clear. 3 figures, a man, a woman, and a horse, standing before a cabin under the stars. Beneath it, a single word, safe. They didn't speak for a long time after he left. Didn't need to, because sometimes a stranger says what your own blood never could. That spring, Stella planted wildflowers by the porch. The seedling from the tin can had bloomed, purple and proud. Frank built her a bench under the cedar, hung the wind chime again, and beside the door, he carved a new sign into the beam. Riley Creek Ranch. Kept, not claimed. That was the thing about Frank and Stella. They didn't build a monument. They didn't have vows carved in stone. But they left behind something stronger. A life no longer haunted. A land no longer for sale. A man and a woman who didn't need to be saved. They just needed someone who'd stay. The story that stayed. Some stories don't end with a kiss. Some end with a saddle hung back on the wall, a chair turned to face the creek, and 2 people who chose not to run. Frank Buchanan never stopped loving his wife, and Stella Riley never erased her pain. But somehow, in the quiet rhythm of fixing what others forgot, in the soft look over a steaming mug, in the way he gave her land instead of questions, and she gave him mornings instead of answers, something sacred grew. Not love at first sight, but love that lasted after sight had faded. It's easy to forget. Some folks just need to be seen once and given a place to stand still without fear. That's what Riley Creek Ranch became. Not a sanctuary, not a monument, just a place where no one had to ask permission to stay. Frank never spoke of Michael again, but every spring he'd find a letter buried beneath the mailbox rock, unopened, unread, and still unburned. Some legacies are complicated. Years passed. Wildflowers took over the ridgeline. Valor lived to see 23 seasons. And in the barn, where old cavalry gear once gathered dust, a new saddle was carved by Stella's hand, not for speed, but for comfort. A saddle meant to stay close to home. No grave was ever dug for Frank. He'd asked for it that way. "Let me stay in the wind," he'd said. So Stella kept the porch light lit every night after he passed, not because she believed he'd come back, but because she believed someone else might need to arrive. And they did, over the years. Strangers, drifters, children, too quiet for their age. None of them were asked to explain. They were just handed a plate and a place to rest. That was Frank's real legacy. Not the land he saved, not the money he refused, but the quiet lesson he left behind. Sometimes staying is braver than leaving. Sometimes love is quieter than forgiveness. And sometimes, just sometimes, a woman with a horse and a past can build a future with a man who never asked her to change. Tell us, what did this story stir in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments and rate it from 0 to 10. And if you want more stories like this one, be sure to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a ride. If you've ever chosen silence over revenge, if you've ever given someone space to heal instead of forcing them to speak, comment below. I understand, Frank, because some of us know what it means to love quietly, to protect something without applause, to believe in one more spring after everything's burned. Next story, it'll dig even deeper. But for tonight, let the porch light stay on, let the wind chime sing, and let this memory live quietly beside you, like a rider who never left.